Hello and welcome once again to Phil's Flicks, the YouTube channel dedicated to providing you with brand new or alternate audio commentaries over some of my and maybe some of your favorite films. Today I'm taking a look at the 1986 Disney film Flight of the Navigator, an all-time favorite of mine from 1986. This film is now 30 years old. Originally, this film was never even going to be released by the Disney company. It was originally owned and going to be released by a company called PSO, the Producers Sales Organization. This is a company founded in 1977, but unfortunately was forced into bankruptcy in 1986. Some of the films that they put out that eventually got released by major motion picture studios included Short Circuit, 9.5 Weeks, Prizzy's Honor, The Neverending Story, The Outsiders, Never Say Never Again, and Cujo. This film was actually directed by Randal Kleiser, who many of you probably know as the director of Grease from 1978. Randal also directed The Blue Lagoon with Brooke Shields, and he also directed the film Big Top Pee-wee, the follow-up film to Pee-wee's Big Adventure. One of the things I really love about this film that just kind of makes it is the score. It was done by Alan Silvestri. There's his credit right there. Alan was the composer of soundtracks to a lot of my favorite films of the 80s, especially the Back to the Future trilogy. He has had a great career doing such hit scores for films like Forrest Gump, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and a couple other films from Robert Zemeckis like Romancing the Stone. This sequence here, it's supposed to take place, they haven't really set it up yet, but I'm going to kind of, give it away a little quickly here. It's supposed to be taking place in the year 1978 in Florida at a frisbee throwing competition for dogs. Now, when I first got introduced to this film, I was probably about 4 years old in 1987, and I think the real hook for me was, at that time, there were two big films of the 80s that I had already seen on videotape that I really enjoyed. Back to the Future and E.T. And I remember my mom telling me that this film was kind of a combination of the two. It was like E.T. meets Back to the Future. And as I watch this, I can see that. I can see that a lot. As you can see now, there it is, July 4th, 1978. Now setting up the time in which this film starts in. But again, that's really a draw for me. It always was when I was a kid. If someone told me that a film was like another film that I loved, then I was definitely going to watch it and check it out. And if you told me, if you love Back to the Future and you love E.T., then you're going to love Flight of the Navigator. Well, then I'm going to watch it. Setting up now the family here, we've got David Freeman, the main character of this film, played by Joey Cramer. And we've also got his family, played by Veronica Cartwright, Cliff DeYoung, and his little brother Jeff. I forget the name of the actor who plays Jeff, but he really didn't do much acting after this. Veronica Cartwright, of course, had her share of credits before Flight of the Navigator. She had starred in the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1978 with Donald Sutherland and Leonard Nimoy. Cliff DeYoung had a slew of acting credits under his belt. He also was well known, at least for those who are fans of Rocky Horror Picture Show, for playing Brad Majors in the follow-up film to Rocky Horror Picture Show Shock Treatment in 1981. I had an interesting chat, actually, with Veronica Cartwright. I met her at a trade show called the Hollywood Show back in 2015, and I told her I was going to be working on this episode for my Phlicks channel, and I asked her if there were any interesting stories she could tell about the making of the film, and she had an interesting one. She told me that while working on this film, Randal Kleiser would often have them doing sequences where they'd either have to be looking up at something or down at something when it came to, looking at either an alien ship or an alien. And she said they kept changing their mind throughout the film, whether they wanted to have the actors looking up, looking down, looking up, looking down. So she said, we got so tired of the indecision that finally, when one day Randal said action, we all just got down on the ground, lay down on our stomachs on the ground because we were tired of being told, look up, look down, look up, look down. I thought that was an interesting story. Here now is a little bit of a reference to Grease. We have You're the One That I Want playing on the car radio there as they pull up to their house. Randal Kleiser once again directed Grease, so there's your little reference to another movie there. Of course, taking place in 1978, showing signs of the times. This was filmed primarily on location in Florida. They did a lot of shots here near the water areas. I always liked Florida in the 80s. I visited Orlando a lot. I remember going to Disney World for the very first time when I was about 4 years old in the late fall of 1987, and then I went a year later in 1988. Just had a great time. Some of the scenes in this film were actually shot on location in Norway. The original company that was producing this film for PSO was a Norwegian film company called Viking Film. So there were some scenes, I'm not sure exactly which, but some scenes were actually filmed in Norway. It's kind of interesting to think about that. Again, this is, a film that was set to be this big, major sci-fi adventure film, actually. I looked at some of the original ads for the film that popped up on eBay, and some of them made it out to be this huge adventure where, the government is involved, foreign countries are involved, finding out what is, going on with this boy who's apparently been taken on an alien spaceship. And it wasn't even going to be called Flight of the Navigator. The original ads for the film just simply called it The Navigator or Navigator. And when Disney took over, it basically became Flight of the Navigator. A small change, but it definitely says something more when you call it Flight of the Navigator. Just simply hearing The Navigator, you think it's going to be about, an airplane, movie or something like that. And it's not. This is completely different than anything else that was, being shown at that time. There were a lot of movies dealing with space in the mid-'80s. You had Space Camp, you had Explorers, the Joe Dante movie. Of course, you had more movies dealing with alien life forms as well, somewhat, of the B-movie genre. But this film was interesting in that, in the 80s, Disney, a lot of people don't realize, was not doing that well financially in terms, in terms of the films it was putting out. A lot of the animators were stepping down. They were kind of moving towards different projects that they wanted to take on their own. And their live-action films just were not doing that well. Flight of the Navigator, I don't recall it doing that well at the box office. However, again, it was promoted as being one of those films where, if you loved E.T. and Back to the Future, you will love Flight of the Navigator. And again, Disney had more, I think, going for them at this time, 1986, 85, in their theme parks. Orlando, especially at Disney World, their Epcot Center was, booming because at that time they had just gotten their new attraction Captain EO, a 3D movie starring Michael Jackson, produced by George Lucas and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. So they pretty much had it together in terms of what they were putting out at their theme parks, not so much what they were putting out in terms of their films. And again, this was never a 100% Disney film. This was a film that they had received when they put in a bid for it when PSO auctioned off all of their films. And some of them were actually incomplete. Flight of the Navigator, you'll notice as you watch this film later on, some shots look a little bit different. The actors' hairstyles are different. Maybe, there's a difference in their voice. And it was because this film was only about 40 or 50% completed when Disney got ownership of it. So Disney had to take responsibility in filming the rest of the film. The script was fully completed in late fall of 1985. So the film, I think, was actually released in the summer, June or July of 1986. And they only had a couple months to really take care of things. Excuse me again, I do apologize for coughing here. So now we're set up, with this big scene here where David, again, he's been looking for his brother. He already got scared by him, so his brother's already heading back home. Now we get the main conflict here. David falls into this ravine. He gets knocked out. We don't see much of a progression of time, but it looks like he's just waking up moments later. So he's waking up, and he thinks, okay, I fell. My brother's already headed back home. I know Bruiser, the dog, was intrigued by this ravine, but I've got to get back home now. So, okay, setup's pretty interesting here. Just fell, woke up a few minutes later. I'm okay. I can walk. I'm going to go back home. No problem. Walk across the tracks again. Coming back home. Not really noticing anything. Tries to get in. Door's locked. So he yells at his brother to open up the door. But who is it that opens the door? Someone completely different. And it's this moment now where David suddenly thinks, wait a minute, something's going on here. You're not my mom. My parents are supposed to be home. What's going on here? And it's here where really you suddenly realize, hey, now we've got something happening here. The furniture's changed. The surroundings in this house look completely different. He's desperately trying to find his mom and dad. He's not finding them. He's just kind of quickly glancing around. And he figures, okay, I'm going to run up to my room now. Maybe someone's in there. He gets to his bedroom, and it's no longer his room. And this kind of stuff, this can be really scary for a kid. You think you're going home, and when you walk in, everything's changed. Your parents aren't there, your brother's not there. That's not your room anymore. And this is where it really becomes a story. It's like, oh my gosh, this kid was just knocked out for like a minute. He wakes up, and then suddenly everything's changed. And that's where, the film really starts to draw you in, I think. It's like, okay, we got something going on here. This was just about a kid, who's trying to train his dog to be a, champion frisbee catcher. And, he's got a little bratty brother, and his parents, are kind of, wondering if he's, interested in the girl next door or what have you. But now it's like, hey, my parents are gone. My brother's gone. This is not my house anymore. What's going on? And we get this little piece of evidence here, which David only kind of subtly hears. We get this missing person report. And the big question is, okay, we know that he was reported missing in the year 1978. All the descriptions match what he currently has inside the police station. But this assistant officer is saying, look at the date. And, the chief here saying, or the chief detective saying, it must be a typo. And she says he was legally declared dead. And David's, is shocked at hearing, who's dead. And, now they're slowly trying to explain to David, this is no longer what you think it is. This is not the year 1978. You're not, going to be going to the place you thought was home. So here's where they start questioning him. And again, as a viewer, you're wondering, okay, so he's, maybe he's having a dream, is something weird happening here, or, these people at the house, doing this as a joke? What is going on here? But again, the reactions that these officers are giving to his answers, saying, who the president of the United States is, what the date is, what the year is, how old he is, they're just slowly trying to ease him into the reality now that, everything you think is happening is incorrect, David. You're not in the same time you think you are. And I really like, again, how these shots are all slowly set up. You know, you see David's point of view here. He can kind of see someone walking through that window. He shows up at the door, and he's in the shadows, so he can't quite see who it is, but he looks a little bit closer, and he suddenly realizes, oh my god, that's my dad. So he runs out of the police car towards the house, and again, his father remains in the shadow until he finally steps out to glance at David, and he's aged. And then his mom appears, and she's also aged. And David's just really in shock about this, because it's like, you know, Mom, Dad, I just saw you, you know, an hour ago. How did you change so much? And even Bruiser, the dog, looks older. And it's just too much for him to take. So now we're segueing into the space portion. We get a NASA security vehicle showing up here with Howard Hesseman, who plays Dr. Lewis Faraday. Now, I have to say, I'm a big fan of Howard Hesseman. He is an amazing character actor. He starred for years on the TV series WKRP in Cincinnati as Dr. Johnny Fever. He's had some great roles in films like this one, of course, Flight of the Navigator. He also starred a year before in Police Academy 2. And he's just done really well for himself. You know, at least in the 80s and 90s, he just ended up having a lot of roles in film and television. And it's here now where we get our first look at the spacecraft, the alien spacecraft that crashed into these power lines. And I love the design of it. You know, many films prior to this had created these gargantuan, ginormous spacecraft vehicles. This thing looks, as many people have said, about, you know, the shape of an acorn with segments to it. And it's small. You know, it's very, I guess, you know, 80s looking is the best way I can describe it. You know, it's not necessarily building a spacecraft on a budget, but it works. You know, I'd look at that thing and I'd say, yeah, that's a spaceship. That's a space shuttle. I believe it. So now we get David in the hospital here. And the interesting thing about this is that, and I didn't realize this until about a year or two ago, the gentleman who is playing the doctor here with the glasses and the beard was actually the producer of Flight of the Navigator, Jonathan Sanger. And I had no idea about that. I did not realize that the man who produced the film is playing the doctor here. So that was kind of an interesting bit of trivia. Again, Jonathan Sanger is playing the doctor who is here at the hospital. And now we get our next big reveal of, you know, David trying to, you know, get, you know, an explanation of what's going on. The revealing of his brother now, who looks nothing at all the way he did about an hour ago in David's mind. His brother is older now. He doesn't think it's really him. And, you know, I think it's interesting because throughout this film, you know, David's been slowly getting explained to without it being so direct that he's being told, you know, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know. It's his brother, Jeff, older Jeff, played here by actor Matt Adler, who had starred in the film Teen Wolf in 1985, explaining everything to him, you know, very slowly, very gently. You know, he's trying to, you know, make him feel okay. He's trying to tell, you know, look, I need to let you know everything that I can here to make you realize that this is really happening. You know, he explains to him, you know, I'm sorry for jumping out of the tree and scaring you. You know, I felt so bad because you didn't come home after that. We haven't seen you for so long. And it's here, you know, where he is the one who shows David the missing persons report. You know, David got only a mere, you know, hearing of it when the police were talking about it. Here, Jeff actually hands it to him. So it's kind of that moment of realization for David looking at it where he suddenly realizes, oh my God, I'm a missing person. I was declared dead. And it's the big reveal here where Jeff tells him, you know, I used to put these out, you know, all the time. and, how, we kept your room just like it was because Mom kept thinking you were going to come back. And he finally just, very slowly, gets David to realize that, oh my God, I am in a different era. He explains to him now, hey, it's 1986. It's been 8 years since she went missing. And again, he's slowly bringing him back into reality here by doing, their little name calling here. And, David suddenly realizes, oh my God, you are my brother. I am really in the future here, 1986. But again, it's terrifying for him. It's really terrifying, to think, I'm just a 12-year-old boy who an hour ago was in the year 1978, and now I'm still 12 years old in the year 1986. There's a lot of emotion in this film. Disney is very good at getting, a wide variety of emotions played out in their films on camera. And I have to say, Joey Cramer is really effective here. Those genuinely are like real tears that he's crying here. Again, they're reaching these levels of emotion where you really do sympathize with what's going on here. No one wants this, to happen to them, especially at such a young age. A 12-year-old, getting lost in the woods, and then, you get knocked out, and it's like suddenly, bam, you're in the future. You have no idea what's going on. You have no idea how you got here and why everything's changed except you. So again, we're wondering here, did this really happen? Is it all fantasy? Is it all a dream? And, David says it right here, it feels like a bad dream. And, yeah, you're wondering, is it really just a bad dream that he's having? We just don't know. But all we do know now is that there is a spaceship involved. And NASA is now getting involved with this. It's interesting, in 1986, like I said, there were a lot of movies dealing with the space program, all throughout pretty much like 1984 to 1987 or 8. NASA had a space center in Florida, in Orlando. It was the Kennedy Space Center. I think it's still there, and I think some of these sequences were actually filmed at the Kennedy Space Center. I actually visited the Kennedy Space Center with my mom and dad. I believe it was in 1988, so I had already seen Flight of the Navigator at that time, and I remember thinking, how cool it was to be able to see, some of these similar areas that they had where they were filming Flight of the Navigator. Even as a kid, 4 or 5 years old, you're still trying to piece together, yeah, I saw it on, the television set, now I'm seeing it in real life. But I mean, some of the areas were a little bit different, but still it's cool, as a kid, you get to see a space center like that. It's awesome. Now we've got this voice that David's hearing. We don't know what it is, but he's hearing a voice talk to him. And again, as I said, throughout this film, so many people are trying to, help out David, but it's really his brother, Jeff, who's, really his biggest help throughout the entire film. He's really trying to, understand with him. You say you heard a voice, it woke you up. I want to know, maybe I can help you. What is it you heard? But I mean, of course, David thinks he's just, looking at him like he's crazy. But he's like, no, I believe you. I want to help you. Trust me. I'm on your side. All this stuff. Jeff is on his side. He's here to help him. And he genuinely wants to try and get David, to open up. It's like, what is it you're hearing? I want to know. Maybe I can do something for you here. And I love that line. He says, you're probably, the most sane person in this place. That's a really sweet line. Again, as we first met Jeff, he was just this, little pesky brat of a brother at the age of 8. Now he's 16, he's become more mature. He's sympathizing with his, younger, or his big older brother, as he called him. And, he, was realizing, okay, I'm the older brother now, I've got to help him, and I want to help him. So we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to, look inside the spaceship. And, we see them trying to and they're just not able to get in at all. They made a few of these spaceships for the film. They made some that had an open entry. They had some that were sealed, and some were actual scale models. There were a few models that still existed in Disney World. They used to have a backlot tour at Disney Hollywood Studios, formerly Disney MGM Studios, and the ships were on display. I remember going to see them a lot whenever my family and I took a trip down to Florida to go to Disney World, and I remember being so excited to see these vehicles, because again, as a kid who loved movies, I loved being able to see what I saw in the movies outside the TV screen. So to see like the spaceships from Flight of the Navigator right outside, I could reach my hand out to them if I wanted to. That was such a thrill when I was a kid. Unfortunately, the backlot tour is no longer at Disney World. They've removed it completely. They're redoing the entire area right now to make, I believe, a Pixar-themed theme park. And in fact, there's an interesting reference I'm going to bring up a little later on in the film about the interesting connection here to Flight of the Navigator and Pixar. This is also, an interesting look at, computers back in the day here doing these sort of like wire drawings here. This is kind of, the birth of CGI right here. When we got films from Pixar like Toy Story, it was these wire designs here that were used in the creation of the characters. It's very, very primitive, of course, but again, back in the 80s, this was very high tech. And now, of course, NASA getting the connection here, that this was from the mind of a 12-year-old boy, and now they realize, oh my god, this kid knows something about this spaceship. Maybe he can help us. So now we kind of are slowly getting into the second act here, where NASA now wants to involve David in this, saying, we can help him figure out a lot more than what the hospital is capable of, doing with him. The hospital has pretty much done all they can. Now we've got to take control now, but only if David lets us, bring him in on this. I think David's actually wearing a Led Zeppelin shirt there, now that I'm realizing it. Or maybe it's just a picture of the Zeppelin itself. Again, all these shots here were originally done in Fort Lauderdale, in Florida. And I have to say, again, for the times that I was out there, my grandparents actually lived in Hollywood, Florida, not that far. And there were just some amazing times I would have, flying out there. Florida was so beautiful in the 80s. This was before, all these monsoons, unfortunately, started taking over, and hurricanes and what have you. But during the 80s, Florida, it was just beautiful. It really was. I love those palm trees, love the water and the lakes, these outdoor, restaurant areas. They were just beautiful. So, of course, Faraday's trying to, explain to David, all I need is just, a few days, and then you can go home and put it all behind you. And again, it's ultimately David's decision. He's just saying, you want the answers, don't you? I can help you. So he decides, okay, I'll do it. So now he's going into the NASA headquarters now, where they're going to, try to get a little deeper inside his head to find out just what has happened here. What is the connection between David and the spaceship? And again, he's hearing the voices, and he's the only one who can hear them. But it's because he's close to that hangar where the spaceship is being contained. Here's a major 80s in-your-face moment here. Those toys on the bed. They've pretty much, made him feel at home. David's little room with all the toys here and, the TV and everything. Very, very 80s. The other thing David is taking notice here is that mirror. He thinks there's a little bit something going on there with that mirror. And I think he's kind of, got it in his head, I don't think that's a real mirror. I think they can see me behind that thing. Someone can watch me. And that's interesting, any other kid seeing that mirror would just say, oh, it's just a mirror. It's just a mirror. But no, David sees that there's something else going on there. And now again, here's a more in-your-face 80s moment here. David thinks he's going to watch his favorite show, and he tunes into a music video. This is by a band called Blankmenge, and it's called Lose Your Love. These guys, I think, were bigger in Europe than they were in America, actually. And here we get our first look at a star who has gone on, of course, to be huge in both the film and television world, Sarah Jessica Parker. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is pretty much one of the big reasons that this film is still, in the public eye. It's because it's one of Sarah Jessica Parker's first major films. And she's very young here. She had already done she had already done a TV series that was pretty big called Square Pegs. And she was just about to do a film called Girls Just Want to Have Fun with two other stars who have since become big, Helen Hunt and Shannon Doherty. And again, this is where, he's getting the news that unfortunately the shows that he loved back in the day, Starsky and Hutch, they were canceled. And she's kind of shocked here. Sarah Jessica Parker's shocked that he's never even seen a music video. But he's, revealing to her, he's been gone for 8 years. And we get even more 80s references here. He tells her, I'm not the one with the purple hair. And she launches into this story about how she went to a rock concert the other day with some friends of hers, and it was of Twisted Sister. And David, of course, has a great reaction to this. I'll just let this play out here a bit. And I have some personal experience on that. I used to be an intern at a radio show back in Philadelphia that was actually the Dee Snider radio show, the frontman for Twisted Sister. So I had some fun times doing that back in the summer of 2005. I actually got to talk to Dee a few times. It was pretty cool. I love this device here too, Ralph, robotic assistant labor facilitator. I just had to pause again there for the great references to all the different varieties of Coke. It's like there's too much Coke to choose from. The 80s. Again, this is, one of those films that I would say to people, when it comes to movies that I love of the Disney 80s era, there's really only a few of them that I really enjoyed. Two of the big ones for me were always Tron, the original Tron from 1982, and Flight of the Navigator here from 1986. And again, as I said, this did not originally start as a Disney film. And as it was not originally a Disney film, there is some profanity, which we're about to hear in this film. Right there, Jeff, of course, dropping some profanity. Again, this was pretty racy, actually, for a Disney film. There is some light profanity in this film, which accounts for a rating of PG. And again, it wasn't originally going to be a Disney film. It was going to be released by Producer Sales Organization and Viking Film. But, again, as I said, about 40 to 50% of this film was already completed. Disney took over the remaining percentage to get a full-length feature film. I also want to talk about that baseball cap that David's wearing, the NASA baseball cap. I remember after watching this film, I wanted that hat. So, in 1988, when my parents and I went to the Kennedy Space Center, they had the NASA baseball cap. So I remember seeing it and jumping up and down. I was so excited. My mom bought it for me. I was so happy about that. Unfortunately, I do not know if I still have it. 30 years later, I think it was probably ended up in the trash or something somewhere, unfortunately. But for a time, I was happy to have the NASA cap so I could walk around like David Freeman. So now, of course, we are getting into this whole thing about how, yes, David seems to also be able to communicate with this spacecraft. It's talking to him. He's also somehow got stuff in his head that he's able to, say without actually saying it. And it's in this sequence here that David suddenly realizes, now, I already know I'm in a different year, but now apparently there's information inside my head that's coming out of me. What's going on here? So here now we get the reveal of this planet Phalon and this weird alien language. And then, in a few moments we're going to see, all this stuff inside his head dealing with star charts. And it's all very, creepy to David. He just, thinks, okay, I know I don't have all the answers, but now suddenly all these doctors are seeing this stuff inside my head. How's this happening? And, they tell him, after he asks, who's putting that stuff on the screen? They say, you are, David. So, they're just asking these questions, but the answers are coming from his head. Again, David is not giving these answers. They're just all inside his head. And it's basically revealed now, how did David end up in 1986 in just a few moments? Because of, the way the light speed theory works. We get this interesting explanation here from Dr. Faraday. And now we get this thing, again, that really shocks David, these star charts here. And it's like, he's not saying anything, but suddenly these star charts are just popping up on the screen. And we now suddenly get this close look at where the planet that he was on, Phalon, is located. Yeah, and I love the music here by Alan Silvestri. This is all done by the Synclavier instrument. Very cool synthesizer. And that just does it for David. He's had it. Stop doing this to me. I just want to go home. And it's that reveal. Of course, he doesn't hear it. But, of course, Dr. Faraday's saying, it's just not going to be enough time to have him here for just a few days. And again, he's hearing the voice again. He still can't make out what it's saying, but he's hearing it. And again, like with Jeff being able to help him, it's Carolyn who, unfortunately reveals to him that he's actually going to be here longer than he thinks. And, notice that she kind of looks behind her at that mirror. And it's like now she reveals to David that he is actually going to be here longer. And David, of course, he knows that there is someone behind that mirror, so he starts yelling at them. As at this moment, it's interesting, instead of being a scared kid now, David is pretty much just saying, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. Now I've got to come up with a plan. So he walks away from the mirror, and he whispers to Carolyn, a plan he's going to come up with now, just to, he may not be able to get back to his time, but he's going to get back home. And again, like with Jeff, Carolyn's now going to help him as well. She's going to do what she can to get him out of the NASA facility. With the help of Ralph, of course, as we'll find out. Now, here's an interesting little bit here that became a bit of a subplot. She thinks that David's kind of cute, and if David was the age he was in the year 1986, he'd be about Carolyn's age. I'll touch more upon that a little later, about this subplot. Now we hear the voice much more clear, basically saying, help me, help me. And Ralph arrives with just, what he thinks is going to be his breakfast, but the voice tells him, get into the Ralph unit. And that's basically what David's going to do. He's going to make his escape inside Ralph. Now, coming up here is my favorite composition of the score from Alan Silvestri. This is a score called Robot Romp. Again, being such a huge fan of Back to the Future, there was some amazing stuff that Alan did here with the synclavier. The soundtrack to this film was never actually officially released until about 1995, and it became available through a website dedicated to sci-fi movies. And I'm proud to say I own this soundtrack on CD. It's very rare. If anyone would like a copy, you can feel free to leave me a private message. I'll be more than happy to, for a small fee, send out a copy to you. Again, the soundtrack, for what it had on it, there are very few songs, a few hits of the 70s, some pop artists as well. But the score, for me, again, is really what makes this movie enjoyable. Again, knowing the fact that Alan Silvestri composed, music for Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you feel that, because this film was right in between those two hits. It fell right between Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And again, because it dealt with science fiction, I think you get a lot of that when listening to this score. You get that feel of sci-fi. I love that, of course, within these compositions, you get that feel of, like, computer sound. That's not stuff they did in post. That's actually part of the song. These, beeps and boops. So now, of course, he's arrived at the hangar. He still hasn't seen the ship, so, it's a big reveal for him when he finally does. He's just trying to get a closer look here. I mean, he will eventually walk inside, but I think it's interesting to get these, POV perspectives, of course, from what he's seeing here. It's still a mystery to him. He has no idea what he's going to see, and it's like, again, a slight look from the outside, but it's like, approaching it here. I like this, that they added all these, extra doors he has to go through first. He goes to the sliding doors, he goes to the gated door, and then he goes to this sort of like meat locker curtain here. Boom. Love it. And it's just floating there. They have some interesting animation coming up here with the reveal of the entry to the spacecraft. This was done with some interesting start-stop animation here by showing these sort of melting steps that appear right here. There's sort of liquefied steps that drop down. I love that effect. As you can see there, David's hairstyle is kind of changed a bit, and you'll see that in more shots throughout the film. Again, you can kind of tell what portions of the film were already filmed versus what Disney decided to put in, because there are a lot of scenes where David appears to be, or rather Joey Cramer appears to be wearing more of like a hairpiece. This was an interesting effect. How did those steps float? Well, they were being held up by beams, which when angled just right, were kind of given the idea of the fact that they were floating. Like they didn't show up on camera at all. They were very thin and pointed in a certain angle where you never saw them, and it worked perfectly. Very flawless on that. I also enjoy the interior of this ship. Again, it's not dark. It's just a series of panels that, reflect. I think that's very clever as well. I think some of the people who actually worked on Flight of the Navigator went on to do a couple of other science fiction films. I don't know which ones for sure, but some of the designs in this I'm pretty sure were used in other films of the 80s. Now here is the introduction to the ship's pilot, who we will soon come to know as Max. Now, one of the big reasons I saw this film was because my mom had told me this film features Pee Wee Herman. And I thought, Pee Wee Herman's in this movie? And she says, well, his voice is. And I thought, well, I'll still see it even if it's just his voice. And it's true. The voice of Max is Paul Reubens, a.k.a. Pee Wee Herman. But he did not use his real name in this film. He went under a pseudonym, Paul Mall. Mainly because he didn't want people to go to this film thinking it was going to be with Pee Wee Herman. And that was very clever because, again, my mom says to me, Pee Wee Herman is in this film. I don't see Pee Wee Herman. I hear him. At first, I don't really believe that it's him because of the way his voice sounds very deep and distorted. And that's what they did. They actually took Paul Reubens' voice and, kind of edited it digitally to sound a little bit more robotic. But later on in the film, when Max scans David's head to get the information he needs back into the system, he picks up on some of the mannerisms and verbiage that David often speaks. And part of it is a laugh. When he laughs, he sounds just like Pee Wee Herman. And that was kind of the big reveal where it was like, for me, oh, okay, it is Pee Wee Herman. There's the laugh. But, Paul Reubens did the voice of Max in Flight of the Navigator. And if I ever got a chance to meet him, I would love to talk to him about that. How did that happen? Did you have to audition, or did they just think, well, he's got an interesting, distinctive voice, let's bring him in on this. So now, of course, the alerts have gone out to the officials. They know that the door is now open, so now they're, of course, expecting alien life, which it's not alien life. Of course, a little bit more profanity has been dropped now, and we're going to get a little bit more here in a second when David looks out the door. Again, PG for Disney. Back in the day, they would still have a few moments of profanity, but I don't know if that was written by Disney or by producer sales. I have a feeling it was probably producer sales. And the big word throughout this film that Max uses constantly, compliance, that has actually been made into a t-shirt. In trying to find some shirts online for Flight of the Navigator, I have found more and more shirts that feature a picture of the spaceship and just simply the word compliance. So that's kind of become the big word out of this film that fans of Flight of the Navigator will take and put on a t-shirt. Again, another favorite moment of mine where the ship breaks free of its, chains and everything and exits the hangar. And again, the music, just perfectly underscores this moment here. Alan Silvestri just does it perfectly. This one I'm just going to stay quiet for and watch, because again, it's one of my favorite moments. I love it. The way it just comes out like that. It's beautiful. So now we see here why the ship really does need a navigator, because it takes everything so literally. He says he wanted to go 20 miles from here, but he didn't specify, so he takes him 20 miles up. And I just love the reaction here. Oh. There it is again. Compliance. Again, David needs to figure out, he has to specify, do it slowly, drop me down slow here, don't do it so fast that it's going to be terrifying. But again, the ship just drops right back down. And then we get this first sort of metamorphosis of the ship here, showing the difference between a third class maneuver and a first class. This is where we get to see the ship really going fast, and we get to see it sort of shape shift here, which I think is a very cool effect. It goes from like a simple acorn looking ship to like an actual like rocket ship almost. Boom. This was also one of the first films to do, I think they call it geographic mapping. That's basically showing the horizon, the land that you're traveling over, in the reflection. When you see those exterior shots of the ship traveling, you still see the reflection of what it's traveling over. And this was one of the first films to show that. Because you really can't show a vehicle, traveling over something that's, got a reflective surface without showing, what it's flying over. So as you see there, you see the fields of the cows, You saw the water it was traveling over and the marshes and everything. This is a little funny exchange here. I'm sure a lot of kids remember laughing at this whole bathroom explanation thing, do not, no promise. Of course, Carolyn here is starting to get a little bit worried that they're going to find her out. Now, it's in this sequence here where, we've already pretty much sorted out David's story here. Now we're getting an explanation of why the ship is there in the first place. In the original script of this film, there was a lot more of a dark side. There was more of this talk about the masters, that Max was actually a drone ship working for his masters on an assignment and was only given a specific amount of time to do so. And there was this whole thing where within the ship there was this clock with a lot of different symbols from Phelan, basically counting down, and they would all be lit up. And once the very last light would go out on that clock, the masters would basically, say, all right, either your assignment is completed or you will be destroyed. All of that was removed from the final film, but it was very interesting. When I read the original script, it added a lot of darkness to that side of the plot. And I think it would have been even cooler if they decided to keep that in, because it originally had David, not letting the masters kill Max and destroy the ship. He basically said, his, assignment is a success. You guys messed up here. His assignment is a success. It is completed. Do not destroy him. And they actually listen to David, and they keep Max alive and the ship intact. But again, this version in the film, it's a pretty simple plot, but I think the idea of the Masters obviously would have made it probably even more PG-13 territory, and not many kids would have wanted to see it happen like that. So, I think for a Disney film they were right in removing it, but it definitely would have been a much more interesting film, I think, if they kept it in. Could have been just a completely separate film. And there it goes, changing shape again. And it just blasts right out of there. Love that line. Follow it? I can't even see it. And here, of course, is where David gives Max his name. He's basically explaining that he is a Trimaxian drone ship, and he's like, Trimaxian? Well, I'll call you Max. It's easier. Again, more of the geographic mapping there on the bottom surface. It's beautiful. It just looks absolutely beautiful. I've always wished that, this film could be re-released in the theaters. I'm sure there are some places, probably in LA, that have shown Flight of the Navigator back on the big screen, but it could do with, a pretty good screening. I'm sure there are tons of fans like myself who would love to see this back on the big screen, either for the first time or again if they saw it when it first came out 30 years ago. Back to a bathroom joke there. Now, as I was talking about earlier with Pixar, this scene actually uses the word Pixar. He mentions that one of his specimens is from the Pixar elliptic. Right there. The Venus star is from the Pixar elliptic. At that time, Pixar was just barely starting. It was almost like a germ of a studio, just starting to get their feet wet in the world of animation. So it's very interesting to think, hey, Pixar was referenced in a Disney movie from 1986. How about that? A lot of these creatures here were done, pretty much the old audio animatronic method. For the most part, some of them are hand puppets, while others are probably being controlled by rods and remote control and everything. I always felt bad that the cap got eaten. This was kind of a weird moment, I remember. It's an eyeball that's going, aye. Kind of a cheap joke. And here we get the creature that ends up being one of David's favorites, the Puckmarin. I thought that was a cool looking creature. You know, you look at this guy and it almost looks like it could have been a Muppet or something, like from some series Jim Henson was creating. You know, I often wondered, were some of these creatures created by the Jim Henson Creature Shop? But I don't think they were. I think these were all done by Disney. That's kind of a sad moment there. Yeah, the creature doesn't know that his planet was destroyed by a comet. Now here, of course, is the big reveal where I finally realized, oh yeah, that is Pee Wee Herman. Explaining the purpose of laughing, and Max decides to try it out, and he hops right into it by picking up a laugh that sounds just like Pee Wee Herman. So, of course, I love that segue. What else could possibly go wrong? Sir, it's the kid's father. Of course. So, of course, you know, the parents' involvement now is starting to make Faraday even more tense and stressed. And he just tries to buy his time. Of course, you know, Bill doesn't think there's anything wrong. He just figures, okay, he's having a rough day. Just tell him to call me when you get a chance. And now they basically realize, okay, Carolyn McAdams was the last person to see him. So now Faraday's just basically, you know, okay, just find her. So now here's where we start to see some of those changes. As I said, you know, David's hairstyle. Watch it right here. And then watch it in this part. Boom. Now he's got like a hairpiece on. So obviously this was reshot. I found out actually in reading the script there was a little bit more profanity in this sequence here where David has the brain scan done by Max. He's basically, you know, starting to, you know, tease him and mock him and, you know, kind of just general ribbing on him. And, you know, he and Max kind of get into it with some profanity-laden fights. So I'm pretty sure if those were filmed, Disney refilmed, taking the profanity out, making it a little bit cleaner. I like Max giving the whole recipe for the Big Mac. And again, we figure out why the ship crashed was, you know, while collecting specimens in desert flora. You know, we find out that he crashed while looking at flowers. Now, of course, that Max has a little bit of David's knowledge inside of him, he starts to get a little more, you know, bratty with him, kind of like the way Jeff was when he was younger. He starts to, you know, play some tricks on him by bringing them out of the ocean. So now the tables get turned here, of course, where Max, you know, figures, okay, you want to, you know, tease me, I'll tease you. Go ahead, fly it. You're the Navigator, go for it. But because, of course, David called him a geek, he's not going to do anything about it. But now, of course, he refers to himself as the Navigator, so it's like, you know, all right, well, I'm going to find a way to bring this thing back up to speed somehow. Star Trek reference. Very nice. And then, like, literally at the last moment, David finally finds the button that controls the ship. Boom. And it's interesting here, the way they designed the actual steering mechanism here, they came up with these sort of paddles that you have to just hold your arms out and, move them left and right, left and right. But it's interesting, they didn't give them a steering wheel. They didn't give them like an airplane wheel. They just came up with these cool looking paddles, which work really well. I think it, helps the film in its, uniqueness. The way they design the ship, the way that they design the, the reflective paneling, these paddles work. So now, of course, as we segue here, we're now getting the classic portable phone. Carolyn now talking to David's family, explaining to them everything that's been happening. So now they're aware that, okay, now he's in a spaceship. They were keeping him prisoner, essentially. And, I'm here to help. I'm on your side. I'm here trying to help David. But of course, the NASA guys are now, coming in. Basically, they're going to keep the Freemans under house arrest until they hear something from either David or Dr. Faraday. So now again, Max has now gotten a little bit more like a smartass. He's basically ribbing David a little bit now whenever he can, and he's kind of mocking him. And, he's saying, this is Miami. But unfortunately, it is Tokyo. And again, I just love Max there, oops. Like, yeah, I knew that. I knew it. Well, of course, like, David's like, I'm done listening to you. I'm doing this my own way. So now I'd say we're just pretty much getting into the third act now that David knows the right way to go. He's heading home, and now, of course, the Freemans have been made aware of all that was going on, and, they're figuring out, okay, now David really is, on his way back home. That shot was used for a lot of the advertising of the film, seeing the spaceship fly through the Golden Gate Bridge like that. These are some great aerial shots, too, that they do during the flight sequences. You're always wondering, where are they now? Where are they flying over now? So now here we get the sequence involving music. And Max not knowing anything about it. And David's basically going to give him some education here. No, it's not Twisted Sister. This is a song that I think they recorded just for this film. It's never been made available before, and it's just called Trapped in My Mind. You can kind of see a reflection of the film crew in that car. So, as someone who, if you've known me well in life, you know that I'm a big fan of music, classic rock and everything, but this film, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, it was the very first time that I had ever heard the Beach Boys. So, thanks to Flight of the Navigator, I have been a Beach Boys fan. We get Max here, trying different radio stations. He hits an opera. And I love that. That's not music. And then he hits Blame It on the Bossa Nova, and David just can't take it. And he finally hits on something that David knows is music. I Get Around by the Beach Boys. Again, this was the very first time that I had ever heard the Beach Boys, and it was a very catchy song for me, so subsequently after seeing this film and really wanting to hear it again and again, my dad actually picked up a cassette tape of, it was like the Greatest Hits of the Beach Boys Volume 2, which had I Get Around on it, so I could listen to it anytime I wanted, and I loved it. I still love the Beach Boys to this day. Glad to say I've managed to see them live in concert here where I live in Las Vegas. It was a great concert. Love the Puck Marin getting down. So again, with the geographic mapping, you can see the ship reflected in the water there. I love it. So now, of course, Faraday realizes, okay, he's going home. I know that some of my guys are at the Freeman house already. I'm going to need to get there now. I've got to take charge. Now, this sequence here that takes place at Alligator City has some interesting things going on. We get a family that's stopping there just to use a restroom, and two of the kids have T-shirts that reference the '80s big time, and then Al himself here makes an interesting reference to one of the films that, as I said, if you loved these two films, then you're going to love Flight of the Navigator. I love Max mocking Al. So there's this tourist family pulling up here. So when we get a clearer shot of the kids, I'll point this out about the two big '80s references. So the daughter is wearing an Epcot Center shirt from Disney World, and the son is wearing a Miami Vice t-shirt. Pretty cool. Of course, they just think the flying saucer's part of the place. And Al's just immobile. He can't take his eyes off it. And again, as I said, throughout this film, the one that really is, there to help David throughout this whole ordeal, that's, been trying to give him assistance and sticking by him the whole time, has been Jeff. He's the one who takes the call and, gets, the word from David where he's calling from. And he's the one who's basically going to, tell David, okay, I'll come up with some sort of signal that you can see from the sky so you know how to find your way home. So now, as I said, we get the next reference coming up here from Al. E.T. just wanted to phone home. As I said, they always said if you loved E.T. and Back to the Future, then you'll definitely want to see Flight of the Navigator. My parents and I traveled a lot along 95, a lot of road trips. Fun times. Of course, David finally proving Max wrong, and of course, his little comment here, the turnpike would have been faster. So now we're starting to close up the third act here, where Jeff is now going to try and find a way to signal to David without being seen by the NASA guys, because, now they're going past Miami Beach. And it's like, we're almost home. We're heading there. I have to believe that was kind of an ad lib. What's a zigzag? Kind of like a hippo, but with feathers. Again, this tense music here, underscored by Alan Silvestri, definitely, reminds me of like the tense moments during the final act of Back to the Future, where Marty's driving the DeLorean to hit 88 miles per hour when the lightning strikes the clock tower. Just kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat because you're seeing everyone kind of come together. It's like Jeff's trying to get the fireworks set up without being seen by the NASA guys. Faraday and his guys are starting to close in and arrive at the house. The ship's starting to, arrive home, but it's getting darker and darker. David can't figure out where he needs to land. The music just works. It really works. Really heightens the intensity. So now, of course, all David can do is just stop and stand still, because he has no idea where he needs to get to because he can't see any signal yet. But then suddenly, we finally get the fireworks, and he sees them in the reflection of the bank building. So now, everyone starts to realize, okay, he's signaling to someone he sees him. And it's here where David suddenly starts to realize, my friends are all 20, I'm only 12. He suddenly slowly starts to come around and realize, but I'm still 12. And, Max just says, I would take you back, but it's just too dangerous. He says, at least you're back with your family. But it's now, struck David, it's got him thinking, I know I'm only 12 and all my friends that I grew up with, they're all 20. And now he sees, oh no, NASA's there. I'm not going to be able to go directly back to my family. NASA's going to prevent me from going to them because they still want to keep me around for research. So you can see it in David's face here. He's starting to realize, maybe I'm making the wrong decision. Maybe I shouldn't be here. So he slowly walks out, and he just stops. He's not going to come forward because he's looking around, family, the government. What do I do? He's got to make that decision. Everyone's telling him, come on, it's okay, we're here. And he looks back and, it's like, I can't. I just can't. I just don't belong here now. I belong in the year 1978. So basically now we've got David, he's willing to put himself in that kind of jeopardy where he could end up being killed if he does try to go back. But he's willing to take this risk. He just knows what's in store for him if he sticks around in the year 1986. And again, all the stuff with the masters, saying Max's assignment was a failure, that was all taken out of this. So instead it just becomes kind of this, interesting bit about, okay, this young 12-year-old boy, after all he's been through, he was just trying to get home. And now it's like, if you want to go home back to your time, it could mean, risking your life. But are you willing to take that risk? And, after all he's been through, he's ready to say, yes, I'm ready. I'm going to take that risk. So now, of course, tying in a little bit with the Back to the Future aspect, we now get a little element of time travel here, which is done, in a way where when I watched it for the first time, I thought that's kind of similar to what they did for Back to the Future, showing, this going through like, almost like a time tunnel, breaking through, time and space here. It's done in a very interesting way. A lot of light effects and special effects done here with miniatures, but very cool right here. Lots of lightning involved as well. I love the whole flashing back between David and Max, too. And so we get back to David again at the ravine, and we're left to wonder, okay, did this all really happen? Did he really time travel? Did he actually get back? Is he back in the year 1978? Crossing the tracks again. Heading back home. And as he's about to walk in, he hears his dad. And sure enough, there they are. They look the same as they did in 1978. And there's his younger brother again. He actually made it back. I'd like to talk a little bit now, while there's still time, about that subplot I mentioned earlier about Carolyn. The original ending for this film was quite different, pretty interesting as well. The original ending had David's family going out to a McDonald's restaurant, and he notices this girl sitting at a table that somehow looks familiar to him. And it's this young girl with braces on her teeth. And David says, "Is your name Carolyn?" And she says, "How did you know that?" And he takes a seat across from this girl and says, "I want to tell you something. Everything's going to be okay when you grow up. As a matter of fact, you're going to be a real knockout." And she blushes. And he says, "And you'll have some purple in your hair over there." And she says, "You're weird." And he smiles and says, "Yeah, you always say that." And suddenly Carolyn looks up and she sees a falling star. And from David's point of view, it's actually the spaceship. So what happens is that we get that shot in the final part of the film here, as we're about to end. David looks up and sees, during the fireworks, what looks to be a shooting star, but it's actually Max. And as he looks, the Puckmarin pops out of his shirt pocket, and he quickly puts it back in just before Carolyn notices it. So it's interesting, that was the original ending that David ended up meeting Carolyn when she was his age in 1978. But I think this ending here still works. Again, David's back with his family. He's there to watch the fireworks in 1978, and he sees that Max is still okay. And he just ends it perfectly. See you later, Navigator. And it works. It's just wonderful. So, what more can I say about Flight of the Navigator? It is definitely one of my all-time favorite Disney films. One of my favorite 80s films, and it's 30 years old now. 30 years. Absolutely amazing. I just, I'm such a huge fan of it. I definitely invite others to check it out if they get a chance. It may be a little bit dated, I will say that. But, and Tim Blaney, I just noticed, yeah. Tim Blaney, who did the voice of Johnny Five in Short Circuit, was one of the puppeteers for this film. That's pretty cool. Along with Tony Urbano, who also worked on Short Circuit. I definitely recommend it. It's a fun little film, and it's short, not too long, nice for a little afternoon viewing. And, again, if you want to see what Disney was putting out in the 80s, this is the perfect film to get a look at for that. Again, if you were a fan of the 80s, you're a fan of space travel movies, and again, if you're a fan of Back to the Future, if you're a fan of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, give Flight of the Navigator a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Again, great story, great soundtrack and score by Alan Silvestri, and, I congratulate all those involved with it. It originally wasn't going to be a Disney film. It was going to be Producer Sales Organization, and it was going to be just this very serious space adventure action drama film. And Disney really did a great job with it. So, once again, for Phil's Phlicks, this has been Phil Smith taking a look at the 1986 Disney film Flight of the Navigator. I do hope that you will subscribe if, again, any of you are interested in obtaining a CD soundtrack of this film. Send me a private message. I will be happy to make you a copy. Stay tuned for the next episode of Phil's Phlicks. For episode 2, Flight of the Navigator, this has been Phil's Phlicks.